By the end of this presentation, you will learn what a WSDL file is and how it can be used by a developer, an analyst, a tester, etc. I've done this in the past, but the quality wasn't that great. I know a lot of you have loved that video, but the quality unfortunately wasn't that great. So I'm redoing it with a few additional details in here. You can refer to the WSDL and schema files on my website, which will be under this video as an example. But here we go. The WSDL file stands for Web Services Description Language. WSDL stands for Web Services Description Language. It is an XML file. Since it's an XML file, it can be easily read by human as well as tools like WSDL to Java, WSDL to .NET, etc., which can generate stubs out of this WSDL file. A WSDL tells two things: what a particular web service does, and then how it does it, or how it can be consumed. So based on these two, what and how, a WSDL file is categorized or divided into two main parts. The first part is made up of types, messages, operations, and port type. The second part is made up of binding and service. The root element within which all these elements are present is the definitions element. So within definitions, the first types element is where we define all the data types using XML schema definition. So if you are familiar with the XML schema definition from my videos, you already know how to define all the messages you want, all the SOAP messages you want to exchange. So in the user profile example, which as I said will be on my website, which you can download, the type section will import a user profile.xsd file. And then that user profile XSD has all the response XML elements that are going to go from the user profile web service. And also the type section will have a request element, which is nothing but this particular web service I have giving as an example takes the user name and sends the user information back. So the request element will be one single string, which is the user name. So the type section, you can dump all the XML schema definition into this, or you can import an external XML schema file that can be used in the below sections. So once we have the request and response types defined, we define the messages. Messages are analogous to our input and output parameters, or the input parameters and return types of methods in Java, .NET, or any other programming language. So using the types defined here, we define the input message, output message, fault message, etc. Once we have the messages, we use those messages to define operations, which are nothing but methods in our programming languages. Port type, the weirdly named element, as I always say, is nothing but a collection of operations. So inside port type, it's a root element for the various operations which we might have in our web service. So this part of the WSDL file is the abstract section or the theoretical section. It doesn't do anything, but it tells what can be done with this web service, or how it can be or what this web service can do for a particular consumer or a client of the web service. Here is the key section, the second section, which has the binding and then the service elements. The binding tells what kind of SOAP message goes out at runtime. So the binding is for the web services stack providers like WCF or Apache CXF, Apache Access. It will tell them how the generated SOAP service should look like. There are 4 different bindings: document literal, RPC literal, document literal, wrapped. Document literal wrapped is the best way. There is a very nice article on IBM. If you just Google for SOAP bindings IBM, you will get an article which defines all the different SOAP bindings and why you should use document literal. I'll even add a link to that on my website. You can download it from the link below this video on my website. The binding section also links the abstract section to the actual section, or the practical section, which actually tells how to consume this web service. So using the name element. In the name element, you point it to the port type. So that's the link between the abstract and the real portions of a WSDL. The last section is the service element. This is where you tell your client how this particular web service can be consumed. You just point the URL to it. So look at the user profile and user profile WSDL and user profile schema below this video as an example, and whatever I have explained so far will be very easy once you go through the WSDL and schema file to understand. So that's about the WSDL file. Now, how or why is it so important for an analyst to understand a WSDL file? It's important because an analyst can tell the client, see, look at this WSDL file and this is what we are going to provide you, or this is what you can consume from the web service we are going to deliver you at the end of the release. It's like a contract. So even before we start our development, we can define, analyst can define, or a developer can define a WSDL file, hand it over to the analyst can show it to the end client and get it signed off. Then for the developer, when we are doing contract first web services, a WSDL file can be used as a contract. So we define all the contract, then we generate the stubs out of it using tools like WSDL to Java or references in .NET world, web references, and you can start your development from there. There are several videos which I have posted which show you how to do contract first web service. For the tester, a WSDL file is important. He need not understand the whole thing, but he at least needs to understand a few sections. You can simply grab the URL where this WSDL file is located, paste it in a SOAP UI, tool like SOAP UI, which can test web service. SOAP UI generates the SOAP request for you, and when you hit the play button, it's going to send the SOAP request to the appropriate server, get the SOAP response back, and show it to you. But if you are on a automation testing team, and if you are writing some code, then it's good to know these sections and see where it maps to the generated stuff. So each of these sections, when they get converted into language objects, they are in an object-oriented format. You can see where exactly they go. Messages go into the parameters, return types, then the operations go into the methods of the generated objects. Finally, the client and the consumer needs to know about a WSDL file because, of course, he needs to consume it. So if he wants to invoke our web service, he has to get our WSDL file and then work with it as required. WSDL was mainly for the SOAP-based web services, but from what I read, WSDL 2.0 is going to support even RESTful services. So we can define a contract going forward. I'm looking forward to it, even for the RESTful side of it, which is now lacking. So to quickly summarize, a WSDL file is a contract between a web services provider and a consumer, and can be used by various roles in various ways. The root element is the definitions element, and at a high level, a WSDL file is segregated into two sections, the abstract part and the real part. The abstract part tells what this web service provides, and the real part tells you how this particular web service can be consumed, or how the request and response at runtime will look like.